So I grew up in Nairobi, Kenya. I was born in Gambia, and my father moved to Nairobi in the 80s for work, and by default, that's where I grew up, in a very international, multicultural setting. And I moved back to Gambia in my teens, finished high school, and off to Canada for university, which is usually the trajectory of many people in many of my peers at that time. Whilst I was in Canada, I was in university in Toronto, York University, and I was studying international development and economics. My passion had always been in development, and I always thought I was going to follow a career path in the UN or somewhere, one of these agencies, especially in the developmental field or in the economics field. And I come from a family background of that. My entire family are within some sort of diplomatic capacity, and never had any intentions to be a businessman. But whilst I was in school, two of my close friends, one from Tanzania and one from the Bahamas, would always complain that there was a lot of these clothing brands, urban clothing brands that they're called, out there, and we'd spend a lot of money on them, but none of them really represented our culture, what we used to call third culture kids, the kids that come, yeah, we are black, but we're not African American. We have a different identity. And we decided to start making our own t-shirts, and the t-shirts would represent powerful figures from our culture. I remember our first t-shirt was Patrice Lumumba. We had one of Marcus Garvey. We had Nelson Mandela. We had these different icons. We started printing them, and then printing as well specific moments in history that were very powerful. And it didn't need much explaining to say what that t-shirt represented. And we do that as a hobby in university. And we'd wear the shirts, and then they gained a lot of notoriety on our campus. And sooner or later, our friends started asking us to make them shirts. So we started doing that, and it got to a point where there was so much of demand from our friends for these shirts that we couldn't do it for free anymore. And we decided, all right, we'll start charging people to do it. And before we knew it, we decided to create a brand. And I remember even discussing the brand name, and we wanted to find something that represented all of us and represented our values. And the central theme was purity. And we want to represent a pure message that represented our cultures. And I remember suggesting the name Malaika, which is a name that I felt transcended religion, culture, represented so many things. And the realization came from the fact that I'm Muslim, and in Gambia we have a Muslim culture. And Malaika means angel, and everyone in Gambia knows what that means. But then again, also in Kenya, which is not a largely Muslim population, in Swahili, Malaika also means angel. And if you look around the African continent, everyone could identify with that. And those are the type of things that we wanted to represent, what unites us all despite our differences. And that's where the name Malaika came from. And that brand took off for university standards, really took off in our school and other universities in Canada. And yeah, before I knew it, we were running a small business without ever having the intention to have started a business. And at that time, I would say it was a success, especially for where it came from to what it ended up being. And when we all finished university, finished meaning I decided to come home and explore other opportunities, because I was always fixated with what we also used to call within the Malaika movement, the African Renaissance. And we felt as though this whole idea of third culture kids who are now exposed, educated, have the know-how and the will and the desire to do more for Africa, to be able to stand on a global scale, a global platform, representing Africa on the same level as every other country in the world, meaning how do we develop our country, so our country, our continent, so that we're on the same level in every aspect as everywhere else in the world. And through my studies, through international development studies, we learned a lot about the market linkage, breakdown in market linkages. I was fascinated with the fact that most of the world's inputs come from Africa, but none of the finished products are African. And we import the finished products back. And to me, this was just a crime, a fallacy. We cannot continue to exist like this. And my reason for coming home was, all right, what can I do in my capacity to make a change in that sense? Which is take something that is, we have an abundance at home, and create something of value that the world needs. And when I came home, I looked at all sorts of, before I got into the mango business, I'd been in all sorts of petty trading businesses. And I landed on the groundnut business. In Gambia, historically, it's a groundnut exporting country. It's our main export, it's our main crop, so it affects the most amount of people. The most amount of farmers are peanut farmers in Gambia. So I decided to enter that business from the bottom and learned it and became an exporter and had relative success in doing that. But I wanted to go further. I wanted processing. I wanted to start a factory.
How did you have? Let me ask there, because it when you count a story like this, it sounds simple, but how did you have success in trading groundnuts? How did it happen, or did that just come naturally to you, like
No,
like a past life experience?
Yeah. So always looking back, you sort of summarize a lot. I didn't have success the first time. I actually lost everything I had my first groundnut transaction. So, and that's how I learned the business.
What went wrong on this?
Yes. So I'll explain a very funny story. How I got into the groundnut business is I started, me and a few friends heard that there was an exporter from China who wanted to export cashews. And that particular exporter had, the rumor was, had $8 million to export cashews. And for me, it was like $8 million is enough for me to know I need to be working with this person. But nobody knew who he was, where he was. So in this area we're in right now, the Tanifing Industrial Estate, this is the main industrial zone for Gambia. So we basically went door to door, asking everybody, have you seen anyone from China interested in exporting cashews? And we met a laborer who says, I know of a Chinese guy who's just set up a warehouse and wants to do some business in cashew. I'm not sure if he's the guy, but I'll take you to him. And so me and my friends, we went there. At this time, we had not a penny to our names, not any experience. All we knew is that Gambia has some cashews. And we didn't know anything else but that. So we went to the Chinese guy, and he said, yeah, he wants to export some cashews and do business in Gambia. So we were like, yes, we can supply you. So he's like, oh, really? We're like, yes. And he asked us, how much can you supply? We're like, however much you need. So he's like, okay, go bring me what you can bring me. So me and my friends went out, started looking for cashews. Remember, without a dime, without any experience, nothing. And we looked and we looked and we looked. And we realized it's not that straightforward. There is so many variables to the business that you can't just wake up one day and say you're going to supply cashews. So I remember being so ashamed that I was going to break my word, that I decided to set up a meeting with him. And we basically broke down to him exactly why it's not going to be easy to get him cashews. And in my head, I was thinking, this is it, that opportunity is done. And oh, by the way, it turns out he wasn't the guy with the 8 million. This was just just somebody else. So turns out he was so impressed with the honesty. He was so used to people saying they can do stuff and not do it. But he was impressed with the fact that we were honest. And we also broke down the situation in a very structured format where he could understand the market. And to him, that was important. It was valuable, I guess. So he called us back and he said, listen, I was just testing you. I knew you couldn't bring me cashew. I'm really here to do peanuts. But I like the honesty, and I see that you're very young and you want to work. So I'm going to give you an opportunity. Trade peanuts for me. Bring me peanuts from the villages, and I'll buy them. And your commission is so much. And again, we're like, now I was a bit more cautious. I'm not going to say I can do it. So, you know, I'll get back to you. I'll go and find out. And that's how I started meeting the traders and doing my due diligence, finding out how the market works. And started by trading one truck. That's where I first had my first failure. We were using his money to buy. So I remember going to a village where I had promised all the farmers I'm going to buy all the peanuts in the village. So by the time we arrived in the village, the chief of the village already announced to all the farmers in the village and all the surrounding villages that there's a big buyer coming. I remember I don't have any money. I'm using someone else's money. And I was going only to prospect. But I got there and I found a mountain of peanuts. And everybody was agitated. You know, we bought our peanuts. We've been waiting for so long. I'm like, whoa, I didn't come here to buy. And it almost turned into a riot because now it's the entire village and everybody is depending on you, and they've been waiting for you for hours to come buy their peanuts. And for me, all I see is a mountain of peanuts. I don't know how much is there. I don't know who owns what. I don't know anything. But I knew that I can't leave the village without buying these peanuts. That's just, they won't let me leave.
You won't survive that.
There's no way. So I remember we didn't even have a truck. So the closest truck was 3 hours away, right? And we're talking about a village where there's no electricity, there's nothing. The closest cold drink is a 45-minute drive away. So this is remote. And there's a language barrier. So we're dealing with a translator who I'm not sure if he's explaining exactly what I want. So the easiest thing was, okay, you know what, we'll take the peanuts, right? Now we just got to figure out how much peanuts is here and who owes what. So that took all night, and there's no electricity. So we're using flashlights and car lights to do this. No scale. So we're just estimating how heavy a sack is and doing it by that way. Long story short, the next day we were able to take all the peanuts. I called the Chinese to send some money. We buy everything. Then we get back to the warehouse and we weigh everything. And I realize I've overpaid by almost 2 truckloads. So it's a total loss, right? And now I owe the buyer money. So now that was a massive, that's why I say I failed miserably when I first started. But that moment taught me that I have to take my time and I need to understand how to deal with the suppliers. And yes, like that, I worked one period at a time till I paid him off what I had messed up in the beginning. And yeah, we built that relationship, and I was just trading and supplying him, and also telling him my ambition to become an exporter. I want to become an exporter. I don't want to be just supplying to you. And so I started spending a lot of time with him, learning the trade, understanding the international market, understanding the quality, understanding what it took to be an exporter, realizing that it's a completely different business from being a trader. But I guess the experience of being a trader and also converting that into becoming an exporter gave me an added advantage as well. So when it became time for me to become an exporter, I started doing it myself. I had earned some money from trading, and yeah, started exporting myself, and that's where I had my first real success exporting. And then 2 years of that, everything was going well. The second year is when I decided, because it's a seasonal business, that I have to have another, I need to be doing more. So I looked at processing peanuts, and I realized it's not, I wasn't in a position to do that. And then I remembered I used to buy dried mangoes for $8 for a 100-gram sachet in Canada when I was in university. And I remember it used to come from the Philippines. And my entire business plan was, well, the Philippines is further to Canada than Gambia. So there must be a margin. And that's how I started. I wrote the business plan, I studied the supply chains, and then I took my peanut money and invested in a mango factory.
Peanut money, I love
Yeah, my peanuts. And invested in a mango factory. And yeah, it's grown steadily ever since. Definitely the hardest thing I've ever done. Sometimes I just think back to the old days when I was just simple peanut trader and my only problem was making sure everything tallied up. But running a factory is a completely different ball game that challenged me in a completely different way. Again, I dropped out of school in my 4th year of university to pursue this entrepreneurship.
This was the t-shirt business that you were pursuing then, or you already pursued the peanut business?
Yes. No, so I was in university when I started pursuing the peanut business, and I was due to head back to school, but I had just started making headway in the peanut business. So it was an opportunity cost for me. And this was the conversation I was having with my parents. I said, listen, I can go back to school for 1 more year. This is how much it's going to cost. If I get into the peanut business for a year, this is how much I can make. And let's analyze this. Why am I really in school? I'm in my 4th year. I've learned everything I'm going to learn. The 4th year, it's writing reports. It's summarizing what you did in the last 3 years. So I'm not going to learn anything new. So why am I really doing this? And I told my parents that literally I'm only doing this so you guys can have a certificate. I mean, just see the heartbreak in their eyes. And literally that's why I was doing it. It was just so my parents would be proud of me. Being now the entrepreneur, I guess the entrepreneurial negotiation, it was part of me. I just didn't know I had it. I negotiated a deal with my parents that I would take a year off. And if I have something to show for myself within a year, then I can stay. If I don't, I have to go back. So that year, I didn't have anything to show for myself, but I was so deep into it, I couldn't leave. And I think my parents just knew that this is not even a conversation to have. And here I am now. So needless to say, now they're proud of me, but at that time, it wasn't. It was really tough.
I love that share, because from almost every changemaker we've met so far, we always ask them, so what did your parents, your friends say when you decided to become an entrepreneur? And in the African context, I almost always say, are you crazy? What's wrong with you? You cannot make a business out of this. So, and almost every time the entrepreneurs find a way to bring their parents closer to the idea, to make it more tangible, or to negotiate some out time. Let me try it. If not, I go back,
Exactly. I always say that with African parents, there's only 3 options. So you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, or you're a failure to the family. That's it. And and for me, I prefer being the failure to the family, because the failure to the family means once you've been the failure to the family, nothing holds you back anymore.
You have all the freedom. You're already on that position.
Yeah. So, and I also felt as though my degree would trap me, because I felt as though this is why I left when I left school, because I felt as though once I have my degree, the pressure would be on me to go and find the job, to go and pursue my master's, So there was this expectation that our parents put on us. And because I feel as though African parents plan your life before you're born. And you're going to get your degree. Once you get your degree, you'll take an internship here, and here's the job. It's all laid out for you. And to break that, it's harder to break that cycle once you have the degree. But when you drop out and give them no option, listen, I don't have an option to go for a job interview. I don't have a degree. Then, okay, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to build my business. So, that's the ultimatum you sort of have to give. And it's unfortunate, but I also think that now the entrepreneurship is becoming more mainstream. And I think our parents, our kids, I'm sure, and our younger brothers and sisters will have an easier time convincing their parents that they want to be entrepreneurs than we did. I think now there's a lot more light on young entrepreneurs and what the possibilities can be for us. So I think slowly it's changing. I've seen the change with my parents, but it literally had to take me from being the lovely son to a failure in the family to get them to see. And now they're my biggest fans. Everywhere I go, my dad, oh, this is my son with the mango factory, you know? So, and it's just, but at the moment, it's really tough when you don't have the support of your family. Although you know they're supporting you deep down inside, but it's more of the fear of the unknown. Our parents, just Africans in general, are scared of what they don't understand. And if they're so used to certain things, it's very hard to push them away. And I think that's one of the things that I think all entrepreneurs have. It's we always feel, for better or worse, we always feel like we know better. For better or worse. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And in my case, I felt as I knew better because I knew exactly what I had in front of me and I knew what my options were.
A lot of gold in this. And also on a middle level, I can see that you put yourself in several, let's say, impossible situations where you just had to continue. And I think that's oftentimes an important driver. You owed the Chinese guy money. You had to continue until you paid him off. No choice. Let's say no choice in your value system. The same with your parents. You say, okay, I'm going all in, and then no more choice. I'm already too deep in. And I find this quite interesting. I think they call it burning the bridge, you know, and it's ultimately the bridge is maybe not burned, but in our perception it is. And that keeps us going forward, maybe.
I've never thought of it in that sense, but I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly what it was. I have never looked at it in that point of view. But yeah.
You mentioned that you had a few challenges setting up the factory. And I can imagine it's like an entirely different thing from trading. Much more material. Now you have a heavy asset, basically. What were the challenges that you were facing?
So many. I don't know where to start. I think every part of setting up a factory is a challenge. You have to remember, I was coming from a place of no experience. I learned on the job. I learned everything I know about trading peanuts on the job. And everything I learned from trading peanuts is what I came into the mango business with. So I was really good at sourcing, dealing with suppliers and things of that nature. But in terms of understanding the quality and how to manage a mango, I was novice. So this was very, very challenging. A lot of tons and tons of mangoes had to be thrown away once I've already bought them when I first started. So we lost a lot of money that way. Certification. It took me 3 years of running a factory to be able to, one, afford, two, build the capacity within my organization, and three, build the structures to get certification that will allow my products to be organic certified, food standard HACCP grade certified, so that I can export anywhere in the world and people can be sure that it comes from a clean, healthy, organic source. But within that 3 years, you still have this huge investment in all these costs, and you're not able to sell or produce as much as you need to sustain. So within those 3 years, I knew it would take me 3 to 4 years to get that. But you have to manage somehow. And it's not easy. Also, what we're doing, the factory we have is the first of its kind in the country. So the expertise does not exist here. Everybody we hired had to be trained on the job. Finding the right expertise to come and train the people, we'd fly in people from South Africa, from the Netherlands, all on our dime in a company that was not making any money for the first few years. We're just making enough to survive, right? And we also never had enough money to grow to the size that we need to be to sustain ourselves. So finding ways to finance the dream, because I did stop groundnut trading in 2016 and focused 100% of my time and energy in the mango business. That was also due to, that was the year we had the political instability in Gambia, and it happened right during the groundnut season, so never really recovered from that. Not having that backup of my success in the groundnut business, which was one of the major things that allowed me to invest in this, but also planning that in the first 3 years, you're not going to make any money, you're going to be building the capacity, and thinking that you would have the groundnut as cash flow from the, yes. And then that stops. And now you only have this, but thank God you have this, because at least you have something. And keeping that afloat until you're at a point where you can exploit the market that is there for what you want to do, and at the same time keep growing the business, increasing the capacity, increasing production capacity, adding machinery, trucks, workforce, all of that when you're not making any money is very challenging. Your options are to fold or to figure it out. And I think that is the best way to describe my entrepreneurship journey. It's you can fold or figure it out. There's no in between. And I've been forced to figure it out every single time. And I'm a firm believer that if you have the capacity to learn, not the capacity just to execute. You have to have the capacity to learn and the willingness to learn, you will figure it out, right? Everything there's a solution to everything. And I think that's a golden rule that every entrepreneur, you might not vocalize it, but you believe it. I wake up every day and I'm faced with a set of challenges. And how I go about solving those challenges determines how good of a business person I am or how successful my business is going to be. If I feel that those challenges are overwhelming and I can't do it, then I fold. And I think that is my outlook on everything. So the problem with that is you're always looking for problems to solve and you never rest. It's been quite a journey. There's so many challenges, I can't really even list everything. And as we sit here today, we've been celebrated by different publications internationally, locally, as a success story, quote unquote. But in my mind, we're not a success. We have so many, the challenges are just greater now, right? When I was starting, it was one dryer and about 30 staff. Today we're 80 staff, 2 dryers, a new processing line, different products. But I'm already planning for 6 months. In my mind, I'm living in 6 months from now. I know how big we should be and what we're trying to do. And that's a whole new set of problems. And it's just a matter of how you're going to solve them. You can fold or solve them. And luckily, we haven't got to the fold point yet. And we hope we should be able to solve everything that is thrown at us.
How do you deal with all the load and all this planning, and how do you deal with all the sheer size of your project psychologically for yourself? How do you do that?
I don't know. I love what I do. The pressure is a lot, and sometimes I feel like it's when I do get those moments when I feel like it's too much. I'm only human, but sometimes a quick break and a quick getting your mind off of it. What I've learned over the last, I've been an entrepreneur now for, how old am I? 32, since I was 17. And what I realized is the older I've gotten, I realized taking periodic breaks, taking my mind off of my business for some time is the most healthy thing I can do. Whereas when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, used to say no days off. We're always working. And you don't realize that always putting that load on yourself is actually detrimental to you. because it's exhausting. And for me, when it gets exhausting, I stop everything and I focus my energy on something less exhausting. So I play sports. I play basketball and I play football. I play basketball every day at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. And every weekend, every Thursday, we play football at night. And then every weekend, I'm watching football. So these are my times where I don't think about my business at all. And now I've started to change that to every night after 9 p.m. I don't deal with business unless I don't have a choice, right? If I have to load a container overnight, sometimes it happens. But after 9 p.m., I cut off and I focus on family, I focus on something else. And those breaks, I find, recharge me. And in the morning, what seemed like such a big issue the day before, gives me a fresh perspective. And I usually find that things work out, right? So I think that's the trick. I think you learn that as you go, that you can't overthink certain things. Sometimes it's best to just step back from the situation. And it works for me. Focus on other things, let your mind rest, and approach things with a fresh mind again the next day. And then you realize it's not as big of a deal as you might have thought just the day before. Or the solution was clear. Sometimes the most complex things have the simplest solutions.
That you cannot see when you're overthinking.
Exactly. When you're in the moment, like, let's say, for example, you're hit with a huge bill for something right now, and you realize you don't have the cash flow to do it. But at the same time, everything is messed up in your factory, machines are broken down, and there's too many things happening. If you take a moment to just take yourself out of the situation, right? Luckily, I have a very good team who, if I take myself out of the situation, things will run, right? Nothing's going to stop. When you approach it again tomorrow, you find that, okay, this bill can be taken care of, this is how we can do it. And, I try not to go to sleep. There was a time when I was building this factory, when I was starting, I couldn't sleep. Because every time I lay down in my bed, I would be going through in my mind the 10 million things that you have to do, the deadlines, the financial pressure. How am I going to meet this payment tomorrow? I'm short. What am I going to do about it? And you don't sleep. You end up just thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And it has a knock-on effect because the next day when you're supposed to tackle those things, you're tired, you're exhausted, you didn't sleep last night. So you can't possibly give it your best go. So now I don't allow that, and nothing gets in my way of rest and taking my mind off the business because I need it. This is very important.
I think that's really good advice, and maybe really something that we learn the longer we are on this journey. And oftentimes, as you rightly said, we think it's productive, but it's actually counterproductive to stay on that and not kind of also let life handle it. Sometimes things are being handled without us knowing where they come from.
Sometimes you're actually the obstacle. So sometimes I find that there's certain issues in the factory. Yeah, it's my company, but I have good people working for me. And sometimes when I want to intervene and micromanage certain things, I become the obstacle to solving the problem. Sometimes when you let problems happen and push the pressure to the people who are responsible for those things and let them either fold or solve it, a lot of times they'll solve it. So you don't have to, always. And then these things you learn as you go.
Wow. One thing I'm very curious about, you build a very good relationship with your Chinese partner. Are you still in contact with him?
Yeah. So yeah.
The role of mentorship for you seems to have had a huge impact on what you were able to build. Is there any way that you think young people can attract these kind of people into their lives to help them?
Yep. So I remember when I was my first company, Malaika, I was so desperate for a mentor. And because you hear about mentorship and you look for successful people, and you send emails to all of these people and you realize most of them don't respond, and you get discouraged and you're like, okay, I'll do it myself. So but I realized my mentorship relationship with, for example, this Chinese individual happened organically. I wasn't seeking a mentor. I was seeking to start a business. And within that, our relationship built personally and business-wise to the point where he became, quote unquote, my mentor, but was never an official mentorship in the way that we like to frame it, whereas I have a meeting with you every Tuesday. No, it was more of, until today, when I have challenges or when there's something I don't quite understand, or if I just need a second opinion, I pick up the phone and say, hey, this is what's happening in my life. What do you think? And just pick their brains. And I find that the hardest thing to developing a mentorship relationship with somebody is developing the personal relationship first. Because it's much easier for someone who has a personal relationship with me to mentor me if I'm a part of their life than it is to mentor a stranger. And I found that to be true. Whereas he's not my only mentor. He could only also mentor me in the scope of things that he has done, which is the groundnut and the trading aspect. But when it came to my business, I outgrew that. And the things I'm doing now, he's in awe of sometimes. And, so he still gives me great advice, but there's a need for a new type of opinion. And I do speak to other people. I have a unofficial advisory board, and I seek out people for the specific skills, people I have relationships with who are successful in the fields that I lack the experience in that my company needs. So, for example, in finance, there's somebody I speak to who has an accounting background, and it's advisory, not so much mentorship or apprenticeship. It's more of advisory. And I have a very successful entrepreneur, businessman that I speak to. I have someone I speak to on leadership, right? And then also I have my friends, my peers. So my mentorship, how do I call it, ecosystem is very broad. I don't have a specific mentor that mentors me, who I go sit down, have a coffee with every week. I have people who I can reach out to and pick their brains. And I think that is very important. I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably have similar things. And people, if I could go back to when I was 17, I would tell myself not to try and forcefully structure a mentorship relationship with somebody. Try and build genuine relationships based on mutual interest with people, and let those develop into mentorship or advisory relationships. Those are usually the best ones. Those are usually the most honest ones.
I love that. Also, what you mentioned just now, the mutual interest, because for your Chinese mentor, you were trying to help him build his business, and from that there comes mutual respect. And it's not, hey, I want to just take, I want to pick your brain every week, but rather,
adding value. You're bringing something to the table.
Probably then reaching out to people that you admire and thinking about how can I actually add value to them, be it an internship or something else. It could be anything, right?
Absolutely.
What would be your advice to a young person today in Gambia?
It's a tough one. I'm young still, so well, my advice, especially to entrepreneurs and youth in general who are just looking to make it, because I think that's one thing that we all have in common, whether you're an entrepreneur or you just whatever you want to do. The most powerful thing that I had is self-belief. I always believe that every human being on this earth is created equal. Our differences are through our experiences. However, There's nothing that someone else can achieve that you can't achieve. The only thing you might lack is information. And in the world that we live in today, if you're not willing to learn, you're not going to go too far. So teach yourself how to learn. Don't teach yourself how to run a business. If you teach yourself how to learn, you will know how to run a business. For example, when I was working with the Chinese supplying peanuts, I learned more in those 2 years than I did in 3.5 years in university, right? And I knew what I wanted to learn. I knew specifically, this is what I need to know to get to where I need to be. And I think that youth today underestimate how powerful it is to understand how to learn. To take the most important thing the university teaches you. When you're in a university, you've been to university, you spend a lot of time on research papers. And what is a research paper really? They're giving you a topic and challenging you to go figure out what that topic is. Go learn about such and such and bring back the results. And once you master that and you apply that to everyday life, you can figure everything out. With the internet, when I left university, the most I had done was sell some t-shirts. But here I am running a mango factory. I have never done a day of schooling in agriculture, right? But I learned, and I'm learning every day. As we speak, I'm learning so much about finance because my business has got to a point where I need to have that understanding if I'm going to have certain conversations. I might not need to have an MBA. I can hire a CFO, but you need to understand the basics of finance. So I'm constantly learning. So my advice to young people is don't be afraid to learn, but also teach yourself how to learn first. And once you know how to learn, meaning research, meaning through experience, meaning through anything, whatever you want to do, just value that. That is the most powerful thing you can have. Once you have that and self-belief, nothing is impossible. I think that's all I have. I was never the smartest person in my class. I was never voted the most likely to make it. It's just an average. Some people might say below average, right? But I think that whoever met me would tell you that I was always very self-assured. I always felt that if I put my mind to something, I would do it. I was that kid that, all right, you want to race 100 meters, let's race. And sure, I'll probably lose, but I believed I would do it, right? But that's what it takes. That's what it takes. And I'm sure if winning the 100-meter race was important enough for me, I would have trained enough to do it. And that's what it takes. What is worth it to you? For me, mangoes are worth it to me, for me to dedicate my entire life to doing it. So if you have those things, dedicate your life to it as well. I think it's clear that any successful business person that I've ever known has another thing in common, is when they're building their business, it becomes their life. It becomes your life. If the business is in your life, it's not going to be successful. If you're working a 9-to-5 job and running a business on the side, it's not going to be successful. I'm identified because of my business now. It's not, Momarr and he does mangoes. No, it's Momarr the mango guy, right? It's because this is all I do. And I think that's also important. Yeah. But yeah, that's on the tangent. Mainly self-belief and teach yourself to learn.
Now that you've mentioned the importance of teaching yourself how to learn, I'm very curious about what's a lesson that you have had to unlearn. Because I think growing up, a lot, like as a child or as an African child, like you mentioned, there's a lot of things you're taught that later on you're like, question mark. So what are some of the things, or maybe the biggest thing that you have had to unlearn?
That your elders are always right. I think we often don't trust ourselves too much because what society, in our societies in Africa, things are usually black and white laid out for you and you have to live within certain parameters. And we're not raised to question. We're not raised to questions. This is how our ancestors did it. This is how it is, even though those practices might be wrong. And so in my journey, when I was challenging, for example, my parents and my family about what I wanted to do with my life, it wasn't seen as my life. It's what are you doing to the family, right? However, everything I was trying to do would benefit me and the family and everybody in the long run. But just because we are so caught up in the way things should be, we don't question. We don't question why I should have a degree in international development and economics. What am I going to do with it? Right? I love the subject. Education is important. But in my situation, what exactly was I going to school for? And when I got to the point that I realized what the most school could offer me, I already have, which is the ability to learn, the ability to understand value chains and discover who I am and what I really want to do, that was enough, right? So then I start questioning, what is it that is driving me to try to please my parents? Or what is it that makes my parents think that this degree is going to make them happier than me dropping out? Because I'm sure right now they're much more happy that I dropped out and did what I did. But we understand as a society, it's the things that we don't question. It comes into gender roles. It's everything in our societies that we don't question. And we have to have the courage to question it. And I think that's one of those lessons. When I started challenging status quo, it freed me, like I said earlier. It freed me to do what I really wanted to do. It freed me to discover who I am, what I stand for, what my beliefs are, not what my parents' idea of who I am should be. And that's why I'm here today.
Does Tropingo mean tropical mangoes?
Yes. It's so funny, right? Nobody ever gets it. And she got it on the first try. Yeah.
Thanks so much for meeting with us and for sharing your story.
There we go. Got it? All right. That was a nice chat.